Hi, thanks for joining me. You're here at home with Melissa, where I'm getting ready to plant some what the heck? Oh yeah, Venus Flytraps. Behind me you can see lighted up that aquarium that looks pretty terrible, and there in the darkness, those are a couple of my Oscars, and I have their light off and it's real dark. But this one here that looks like an aquarium that needs cleaned, don't worry, there are only plants in there, no fish. So anyway, I just use that as a receptacle for plants that I'm getting ready to put somewhere. But these are the receptacles that I have set aside specifically for our Venus Flytraps. Now, if you don't know what a Venus Flytrap is offhand, it's a really neat plant, looks kind of alien in a way. It has these heads on it that are shaped like pierogies, open with hair around the edges, and then when an insect gets in here, they snap shut, and then it looks like a closed pierogi with long hairs out of the edges, and those hairs kind of interlace and form a bit of a cage that the insect can't get out of, and the plant then digests the insect slowly and at its leisure. Now, those are really nifty plants, and you see them a lot. Kids love them. You know, they're really a great gift for children, but a lot of us adults love them too. And there's good reason. Not only will they clear insects out of your house, like you know, they'll help eat like gnats and things like that if you have them, which I generally do because I use all natural organic potting soils when I'm planting in soil, and you tend to bring some little gnats in with you, and sometimes on fruits or vegetables they'll come in as well. So they help me with that problem, and they're also just really interesting to watch. So I have some seeds for some green ones and some that are just a special variety of them, still the Venus Flytraps, but they're called Red Dragon. They come up in hues of magenta and pink and red and things like that. They're really nifty. So I'm gonna plant a whole bunch of them, and I have here, I've got this very large fish bowl. I have these little things that are usually used for candle holders and things like that. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about them and how to plant them and things like that. Now, when you're going to plant anything, as we've discussed in other videos, a good way to simplify it for you, rather than memorizing, okay, it likes a soil pH of around this or that, it needs this type of soil and that type of soil, and memorizing a bunch of different unrelated facts, a good way to make it a lot easier on yourself is to think of the plant and where it comes from and other plants that are similar, and then think of what it would need in the wild out in nature, and you try to replicate that to the best of your ability. Now, with the Venus Flytrap, you look at them, and if you don't know better, you think, oh yeah, those things, definitely a rainforest plant. Nope, they're not. In fact, where some carnivorous plants grow in pretty widespread areas geographically, like the pitcher plant that we did a video on not too long ago, the purple pitcher plant grows in the United States as far north as, well, it might even grow up into Canada, but definitely grows up in New England. So that is not a tropical plant at all, but it does have a pretty wide range. The Venus Flytrap, on the other hand, the geographical area that it covers in the wild is teeny tiny. It only grows in the wild in the Carolinas in the United States. So all of those Venus Flytraps that you see out there, you know, if you have some or your friends have some, that you buy them in the stores or you buy seeds, all of those originated from these populations that only exist in the wild in North and South Carolina in the United States. And in fact, they grow in coastal marshlands in those two states, and that's it. I know, isn't that weird? I wouldn't have expected that. You know, in fact, I really didn't know until I started doing the research on them recently. I assumed that they were tropical plants, and they're not. So, okay, they're not tropical. They grow in the Carolinas in these wetlands. So from that, you can kind of remember, if you remember a little bit about that, you know a little bit about the Carolinas or anything like that, and you remember that they grow in these wetlands, it's easy for you to then remember that some of their needs. For example, being that they grow in the Carolinas, this is a little bit southern, a little bit toward the south of the United States, but not completely. So they do get winters. They don't get the kind of snow that we get up in this more northerly area or anything like that, but they get cooler temperatures, and very cool in fact. And the plants like the Venus Flytraps and a lot of others will go dormant for that winter period. So if you're growing indoors your Venus Flytraps, remember that. Remember that they have this dormancy period, because you're going to want to replicate that, which means that you're going to want to put them in a refrigerator or a cool garage or a really cool spot in a basement, say, and allow them to go dormant for 2 to 3 months a year to get the best kind of health out of them. Now, you might not care about that. You might not want to fiddle with it. You're going to just grow them in their pots, let them go year round, see how they do. Fine. If they make it, they make it. If they don't, they don't. And you can replant them in the future if you really want them. You know, but if you want to do the best for them, you're going to try to replicate their dormancy period. And also, remember, they are carnivorous plants. Something that's true of all the carnivorous plants is that the reason they evolved to digest insects, or even in some cases small animals, is that they grow in soil that doesn't have a lot of nutrients. So they can't get their nutrients from the soil. And that's the same for the Venus Flytraps, of course, being carnivorous plants. They evolved to eat insects because they grow in areas that don't have nutrient-rich soil. So you're not going to want to give them nutrient-rich soil either. And they grow in these marshy lands and stuff like that. The soil that they have in the wild is nice and light. It doesn't compact. It doesn't dry out. The areas are humid. All right, so you're going to want to replicate that. And that's why I use these. And I'm going to plant in these things because they have the smaller top. And that'll help to hold some of that humidity in. And you know, other ways to grow Venus flytraps is you can grow them in greenhouses, or in, you know, be they big greenhouses or little tiny individual greenhouses or what have you. Remember, if you want them to eat insects for you rather than having to feed them by hand, you want to allow some kind of ingress and egress for insects so that they can get in there and be eaten. Makes sense, right? So the smaller the top container will help hold in some of that humidity. The open top will allow the insects to get in. Now, the next thing we need to focus on is our substrate, or quote unquote soil. As I said, they're not going to want soil that's going to compact like a lot of us have in our garden soil. They're not going to want clay. Oh goodness, definitely not. Their little roots, they don't have a very extensive root system, but we have to give their little roots what they do need to grow. And so they need something really light, something that won't make much of an obstacle for those roots to grow through. It has to hold moisture, because remember, these are in boggy, marshy lands. So it's going to have to hold a lot of moisture, and they also like it to be a bit acidic. So what you could do is you could use peat moss. The At Home Melissa channel here, we do not recommend peat moss for anything because it's not really a renewable resource. Instead, you can use sphagnum moss, and that's what I have here. And you can get this at your garden supply stores. You can get it at a lot of department stores. It's really not very expensive either. And you can get it at home improvement places, or you can do what I did and order it in bulk online. So that's what I did. And you want to mix this, a 50-50 mixture of the sphagnum moss, which helps retain moisture, helps give it its acidity, and either sand, which will help with drainage and things like that while also keeping things from compacting, or perlite, which does that as well as helping to hold more moisture, or vermiculite, which basically forms the same function as perlite. It's a little stone and it's really porous and things like that. I go with vermiculite simply because I always keep vermiculite on hand. I buy that in bulk online as well, and I always keep it on hand. I use it to lighten up soils, and I use it for things like this. I use it for all kinds of stuff. So I use it even when I'm growing things aquaponically or hydroponically. So that's what I'm going to use, is a 50-50 mixture of the sphagnum moss and the vermiculite. Now be aware, if you're using vermiculite, that it can get really dusty, okay? So when you're using it, you might want to use some sort of mask or something to protect you from that. And goofy me, I forgot to bring in a container to do that, but I see one within reach here almost. What you don't want to use is, you don't want to use cocoa coir, the cocoa peat. Sure, it says peat in the name, but it is not peat moss, and it's pretty neutral in terms of acidity. You want that little bit of acidity that comes with the sphagnum moss, so don't use the cocoa peat, okay? Now hang tight, I'm going to get a small container, and we're going to mix up a little bit of this. I'm going to show you how to plant your Venus flytrap. Hang tight. Okay, I just have this small plastic container. It was here, so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to mix equal parts, pretty much equal parts, of the moss and my vermiculite. So I'm using these little red containers, put a container of the moss in, and break it up pretty nicely so that I can then, when I put the vermiculite in, I can mix them a little bit more easily. And a container of vermiculite. Dump that in. Now I'm mixing those up together and breaking apart the moss a bit more because it's basically dried and in little kind of, see, you can see kind of in little sheets, little things like that, and that is not mixing all that well. So then I'm going to add water. With the Venus flytraps, you need to be very careful. You need to make sure that you do not use water that has chlorine in it, because the Venus flytraps will really quickly die on you. They don't like chlorine at all. Some plants can tolerate it to some extent. Not the Venus flytraps. They don't like it. Don't give it chlorine. So I'm mixing this up, and I want to, and I continue to break the moss into smaller pieces and pull it apart. And the reason I'm doing that is just so that I get things mixed pretty well together. And I want to get it nice and moist. I don't want it sopping wet, but I do want it wet enough that if I pick it up and I squeeze it in my hands, it feels wet, okay? But I think this is going to be just about right. But if, when you pick a little bit up in your hands after you have it all thoroughly mixed together, okay, hold on. You want it so that maybe when you squeeze it, a few drops come out. You don't want this. So I went from not having enough water to having too much. Easy thing to fix once you get this all mixed together. And that is, you simply add a bit more of your moss and your vermiculite. And like I said, it has to be about a 50-50 mixture. You don't have to be exact. So I'm grabbing some moss first, mix that in, and I can see by looking in there that it's still a little bit too wet. So this time, I'm gonna get a little bit of vermiculite and throw that in and mix it in as well. That's gonna do us. Yeah, that's just perfect. Just perfect. Woohoo! All right, now when I pick this up, you can see that if I take a handful of it and I squeeze it, mix it a little bit better. There we go. and I squeeze it, I can still get a little bit too much. Shoot, I thought it was gonna be so cool and just get to show you and have it perfect the second time, you know? But nope, still a little bit too wet. So I'm gonna add some more. And don't worry, the mixture that I'm making, I'm gonna use it all. I'm planting about, I think I'm gonna plant probably 40 of these or so in at least quite a few little containers. I have a bunch of them here to fill. And there we go. Okay, so we've got this all mixed up. And if we squeeze it now, we'll get a few drops if we squeeze it really hard. There. It's giving us some drops, but it's not giving us a stream. That's kind of what you want. It's like a wet sponge, okay, that you've wrung out. Then you're going to put some into your container. And I'm going to show you using the big one because that's exciting. I like the big container. Ta-da! Okay, remember with Venus Flytraps, they don't have a very extensive root system, so they're not going to need a whole lot, but you do want to give them enough, and I'm just going to basically put it in your container. Let's see how deep I want it. Okay, there we go. And you want to kind of squish it down, but not a lot at all. Just barely push it down so that it's in there very lightly. There we go. See, that's how much I'm putting in there. See next to my hand how much that is? And I'm going to make it that height. I have it a little bit lower on the one side, so I'm going to raise it up. There we go. Now, it's about that size. It's about the same height all the way around. And it's ready. Get this out of the way. And I put my seeds into this little container, this little canning jar that I'm going to use to plant right now. And the reason I did that is simply because I'm not using all of the seeds that I have. I'm not planting them all today. But I am planting a lot. And they're tiny. I can't even show them to you on camera because they won't show up. They're really, really tiny little seeds. Now, I know that I'm going to be working with my damp hands from working with the sphagnum moss and vermiculite mixture. And so I didn't want to get the seeds I'm not using today wet. That's why I put the ones I'm going to be using for the day in their own little containers. I have one with the green ones and one with the red ones. Now, it's easy to plant these because, did I get it off my finger? Yeah. It's easy to plant them because they don't need to be put under the soil at all. You don't want to put them under there. You can put a little bit of moss on top of them if you want to. I am not doing that because I don't trust myself. I think I'll put too much on and it'll be too much of a struggle for these seeds to get through. They're really only required to be on top of the soil. So then if you're putting a little bit of moss on top, the reason you're doing it is because that moss will help hold the humidity in there. I'm not doing it that way. I'm just putting them on top and then I'm covering the top of my container with cling film. And the reason I'm doing it that way is that this is just to aid it in germinating, because those seeds won't germinate at room temperature. It needs to be, they need the constant humidity and they need it to be a little bit higher than room temperature, up to like 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is elderly people comfortable to sit in, younger people not so comfortable to sit in heat in a room. And this will help it get up to that, and I'm going to put it in a sunny window. You need to remember that, hold on a second, there's something in my way. There we go. You need to remember, sorry about that. You need to remember that the Venus Flytrap requires full sun, like 8 hours of full sun. So if you put it in a southern facing window that gets a lot of sun all day, that might be good enough for you. If not, you might need to add a little grow light or something for your plants, or they're not going to have enough sunlight. So we've got that. We've sealed the top. We've just sprinkled our little plant seeds on the top of the moss, and it's ready to go. It's as simple as that. And then once they've sprouted, once those seeds have germinated, then they will do okay at room temperature. But to get them to germinate, you want it to be a little bit hotter, and the cling film and some sunlight will create the heat we need while holding in the moisture. And there was something else I wanted to tell you. Oh, the size of the plants. They're pretty small. Venus flytraps aren't that big. Full size, they're only going to get about this big around and maybe like yay high, something like that. So they're a smallish kind of plant. So don't be concerned about having a few extra seeds in there, because I know I do. They're just so small, it's hard to get just one seed out. And a trick that some people use when working with really small seeds is get a pencil with an eraser. And that eraser you can use to pick up just one seed at a time. And then when you put it in on your moss where you're going to put the seed, just kind of go like that to dislodge it from the eraser. And that's a good way to try to get just one seed. These are so tiny that I didn't even bother with that. I just kind of sprinkled them in there, and if they're way too close together, I'll thin it out later. I do have extra seeds. So that should be, I think, all the information you need to get growing for your Venus flytraps. And if you have any questions, if there's something I didn't address, or if there's some information that you want to share, feel free to drop a comment there in the comment section, and I'll look forward to checking out what you have to say, and any stories about growing them that you've had successes or failures. Feel free to share. I look forward to seeing them. And I thank you again for joining us, and I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you check in with us again for the next one. Thanks again. Bye-bye.